Welcome to the Grace and Truth podcast. My name is Julia Curran, and I'm the communications director here. And I'm with James Williams, our senior pastor. We're coming to you with a second episode about Methodism. What is it? What is Wesleyanism? What is the UMC? And this episode is titled The Tough Stuff. And we're going to dig right in to some really tough questions. Our last episode, part 1, which you can listen to, got a lot of listens, and a lot of people came up with a lot of questions. So we're going to go right into the tough stuff, James. You speak with great affection for the Methodist Church and for the UMC. But you also said in episode 1 that you felt it was a sick system and that the 21st century isn't made for Methodism, that there's a certain competitive spirit going on in that bureaucracy, and that you became really good at navigating that system.
Right.
So I think those are really important things to expand on for our listeners. What do you mean that you felt it was a sick system?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I can talk more about this because we did get a really good response to part 1 of this podcast. And it's because it's affected so many people. The only thing I would correct there, Julia, is that I don't think Methodism itself is not workable in the 21st century. I think there are aspects of connectionalism, itineracy, apportionments, those kinds of things, I think are struggling and will struggle in the 21st century.
Can you explain what connectionalism is?
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Well, connectionalism in the Methodist definition for it is sister churches that are connected together by not only our theology, which that's not always the case in Methodism, and it's also connectional in that we paid something called apportionments back to the denomination. Anywhere from 9 to 12% of the church's budget goes to back to the denomination. And so we all are in that boat together. Churches support the work of the denomination. And then I think the third thing is a hopeful thing that doesn't always happen well. Pastors are in relationship consistently, collaborating with one another to get the gospel out into the community, and their congregations collaborating with one another to be a ministry to the community. And all that's great. Those are things that we need to be doing. I think it's all biblical. However, I do think that because of the environment that we're in the 21st century, probably the end of the 20th century as well, that model began to struggle deeply to the point that we experienced in 2020, 2021, the beginnings of the splinter or the split, whatever you want to call it.
Okay. And do you think that connectionalism was happening in the UMC?
Well, I think it happened in pockets.
Okay.
I think it definitely did. I know it happened for me, hit and miss here and there throughout my ministry. But I think our system is set up, that system is set up in such a way that there causes there to be great competition among clergy and churches. It's unspoken. We don't talk about it, but it's there. It's there. And I think it hurts the spirit of that system. And it also hurts the ministry that could be done together if we were truly connectional, as John Wesley believed we should be. There's a famous quote, Julia, from John Wesley. He says, I've forgotten what caused him to make this statement. I think someone asked him a question in a public setting, and he said, I don't believe that Methodism will ever die or go away. However, I do believe that it is in great danger of becoming one day a dead sect. And it was prophetic, because that's exactly what happened. Not to say that there aren't good things that God had happen in that whole experience from 1968 to the blow up. Certainly, people gave their lives to Christ. Marriages were saved. Missions were done in the community. But in the big picture, there was always this roaring boil of when is this just going to blow up? And finally, it did. And I think it did. Now, a lot of folks will blame it on COVID. I do not blame it on COVID because there are many systems that still worked after COVID. I believe that COVID did probably take the blinders off of a lot of folks involved in that system, both on the clergy side and lay side. And we thought, okay, what are we really doing here? And here we are.
So in our first episode, we talked about the history of Methodism and John Wesley.
Yes.
And so we covered a lot of the background of that, of Methodism. I know that the Book of Discipline is basically the bylaws for Methodism. I'd like you to talk a little bit about when that was drafted, what the rules are, and whether or not people followed them.
Yeah, I mean, the Book of Discipline, I always described it to my congregations as a guidebook. I was, and again, throughout the denomination, there were folks who they wouldn't make a move unless the Book of Discipline plainly stated you could make it. Or they would hold back on some kind of ministry because the Book of Discipline would say, you can't really go there, you can't do it this way. There was a lot of red tape sometimes and all that. So it was a guide. You asked when it came about. It came about in 68 when we got together and started putting this thing together.
What did they use before 1968?
Well,
was there a Book of Discipline?
The Evangelical United Brethren Church had their own Book of Discipline of sorts. I'm not sure if it was called a Book of Discipline. I don't know much about the United Brethren, but and then the Methodist Church, of course, had a discipline always. That goes back to, John Wesley was methodical. We talked about that in the last. So he wasn't going to just let something go without having pen to paper somewhere and policies. And of course, we added to that greatly over the years. As I look back at the history of the discipline, if you look at some of the earlier disciplines, there were some staunch kind of legalistic things in it, but it hindered ministry a lot less. Over the years, we began to get politically correct and socially aware. And so a lot of things were added to the Book of Discipline that I think caused a lot of confusion over the years. But it's good to have policies. It's good to have procedures. There's nothing wrong with that because humans don't always know what to say or how to act. And so you can always go to the discipline.
Yeah.
And I used to tell, when I was a district superintendent, I would show up for church problems, of course. That was basically my job, is to go help with church problems and mediate. And when I would see a layperson walk in with a Book of Discipline, I knew I was going to be in trouble. Because, it's not I used to say too, if you have insomnia, take the Book of Discipline to bed with you. But it did give us good guidance on theology and our social beliefs. And then also, like Robert's Rules of Orders, it helped us, maintain our organization and the leadership. It really clarified the leadership positions too.
So it was, I'll just say from personal experience, I felt it was kind of weaponized during the crises over the last, over the last 5 years. It felt to me like people kept making excuses for their behavior by going back to that. That brings me into the LGBQT issue because can you talk a little bit about that being in the Book of Discipline? Yeah,
well, the only, we added some wording to the Book of Discipline back in the 70s, I think it was. I think I'm right about that.
I think it was 1972.
Yeah. Okay. So I have so much stuff in my brain about the Methodist history. But so in the 70s, of course, psychiatrists were still stating that homosexuality was a mental health issue and that it needed to be addressed medically. And of course, there were all kinds of arguments about that. until the American Medical Association, they changed their stance on that. And that was also every 4 years, it would come up at general conferences. Do we need to change our wording to make sure this community feels welcome in the local church? And of course, that answer was going to be yes. But then the very difficult part was, how are we going to word it? And so the wording they settled on was, though we believe that in God's eyes, all people or persons, I think it says, are persons of sacred worth, the practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. So that's a very diplomatic way to say we don't support that.
Yeah.
But at the same, so what happened later was, so the United Methodist Church believes that the LGBTQ community is incompatible with Jesus, which that is not what it was saying. It just said that there are standards and there are points of theology that we go to biblically when we make decisions about human sexuality in general, just like a lot of different things that we have stances on. But it did become very controversial. And so it was
contentious, I believe.
And very contentious.
So could you talk a little bit about, though, I don't think a lot of people know how contentious those general conferences, which is the yearly meeting of the Methodist Church, right?
Yes.
How contentious those meetings were. And did it become a situation where that agenda became very fractious with the other agenda? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was like anything else that is unsettled in an organization. It was unsettled how we were going to approach and minister to the LGBTQ plus community. For example, you had your group of people in the United Methodist Church who said, it's a no tolerance thing. We don't even need, like in Africa, the African delegates, they would say, we don't even talk about this stuff. Why are we even putting this on the agenda? It says what it says in Scripture. That's good enough for us. And it's very dangerous to be in the LGBTQ community in Africa.
Yeah.
So just like in the Middle East. So America, of course, did not want to be that. We wanted to share the love of Christ and invite all people into the local church. But you had a group of people that were very, very conservative or very orthodox in their beliefs. And they said, this wording is good enough. Some people would have said, it's not even strong enough. Let's just keep it where it is right now. Then you had another group of people who said in the United Methodist Church, wait a minute, that actually is a barrier, that statement is a barrier to having LGBTQ plus people in the church. We need to just get rid of it and say that we'll even do gay marriages, because that is a very real relationship between two people. And then you had another group of people who said, well, wait a second. We can't do a blanket statement for LGBTQ plus, because what are you going to do with bisexuality? What are you going to do with transsexuality? Those two seem to be outside the realm of what is morally right in the eyes of God. So maybe we can say that being gay is okay in the United Methodist Church, but we've got to exclude these others. And then the LGBTQ community within the United Methodist Church and the folks that would show up at the delegation meetings would say, you can't do that. It's all or nothing. And it just became very difficult. Well, as I said in the last podcast, Julie, which is somewhat controversial, but I believe with all my heart because I saw it, is I believe the LGBTQ community were used in that situation because there are leaders and pastors in the United Methodist Church who have some issues with some of our basic beliefs. The bodily resurrection of Christ, the virgin birth, and you can kind of go down the list. Do you really have to be saved to go to heaven? Why don't you believe it's just one path? Everybody's going down different paths to that one path in the end. And those, we had these, what I call universalist Unitarian kind of discussions in the United Methodist Church, which I thought was inappropriate. And I have great respect for Unitarians and Universalists. That's what they believe. They're free to worship and believe what they want to believe. But it didn't really have a place in United Methodism, certainly not in John Wesley's mind and heart about our theological beliefs. So that's where we ended up where we were. And so I believe now, so the argument you'll hear from the United Methodist Church is, well, we haven't changed any of that. Our Book of Discipline states that we believe all these things. Yes, it does, but there are efforts to change those theological beliefs and teachings, and I believe that they will be changed at some point. It's just a matter of time. But the LGBTQ issues, I believe, they were used to get a foot in the door to those other theological questions.
Okay.
And that's where I think we kind of went off the rails and had to go our separate ways.
So we're an independent church.
Yes. Which some say is an oxymoron.
Yeah, right. Right. So I've often referred to it as we're a Methodist church with a small m, which isn't really true.
No, it's not really true.
No, not at
It's
all.
capital M.
Yeah, it's a capital M. But what do you think about independent churches now after
Yeah.
this splinter of Methodism and these different denominations that are trying to move in? What do you
some
think?
of the
What do you think?
arguments for or against independent church Methodist churches are that John Wesley set it up as an itinerant system, and there were issues above and beyond the local church that needed to be decided by elected leaders and not by laity in the local church. And so that would be one argument. Of course, I covered this in the last podcast. John Wesley spoke of the difficulties of that kind of system, but it was what they knew and did at the time. The other part of it is when we look at the Methodist Church in general, the world tends to see that as the United Methodist Church. But there are so many different facets of Methodism. That's always been the case. You have Free Will Methodist, or Free Methodist, I should say, Free Methodist Church. You have the Christian Missionary Alliance Church, the Salvation Army. You have all of the Wesleyan Church, the Nazarene Church. Those are all Methodist. They're all Methodist places and denominations. But the United Methodist Church carries the name, and of course, it was the third largest denomination in the world. So it had a lot of clout, and that's what you thought about when you thought about Methodism. But I think I've always, as a pastor, wondered, the best of both worlds would be Methodist theology and having congregations be independent and make their own decisions and not have to be under the hierarchy of the top-down leadership.
And why would that be a better model, being independent?
Yeah, well, I think it's a better model in general for human beings. I think it's a better model for us now because with technology and I'm very, very sensitive to being able to minister to the alphas and the Gen Zs and the millennials. And when you put those three together, that's a large group of people in the world, and they find it almost offensive to have to be under the leadership of someone they can't see or talk to or really know about. They want to be a part of the solution, and they want the people that are a part of the solution in the room with them. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. As a matter of fact, I think that's probably really healthy.
So rather than a bureaucratic system where you have some bishop in an ivory tower appointing where ministers are allocated, you're saying this generation is looking for something more in-person, authentic that they can see.
That's right. That's right.
So what do you do about the pastors who need a job and need to be moved around?
That's a great question. And that's because, in the United Methodist Church, you still have guaranteed appointment. So you have,
How's that going?
Well, it's difficult.
Yeah.
It's difficult, and it's always been difficult, but more so even now that we've gone through what we've gone through. But the Global Methodist Church, the new denomination that came out of the United Methodist Church, I call it debacle, is that they said, okay, you know what? We're gonna say that we see this. We're not going to have guaranteed appointment in the Global Methodist Church, and they're trying very hard to keep that, but it's difficult in a Methodist system. There are still places that will need to be filled. There are still places that bishops will have to help churches find a pastor for that person, for that church, and for that person, a place for that person to serve. And so it's not, and it's almost like right now, those two systems, and again, I said this last time, and I don't want to go overboard with this, but I have great affection for both denominations. People will say, you know, I just can't believe that you left the United Methodist Church, James, and because I was very involved. I served a really large church, and I am Methodist to the bone. And I always say, you know, I didn't leave the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church left me.
Yeah.
When I was ordained by the bishop and he put his hands on my head at that ceremony, I was going to be loyal to what I believed was a godly church that made godly decisions, good biblical decisions. I believe that. And over the 30-year period that I was in ministry, I saw us move away from that more and more. Certainly we made godly decisions in that 30-year period as well, but there were enough question marks that I had to say, wait a minute, what are we really doing here? And I think I could always point to, it wasn't the LGBT community that was our problem. Mm-hmm. The organizational structure and folks within that structure operating outside of what we knew was right theologically was the problem.
Okay.
It was never the LGBTQ community.
Okay.
That was an issue that we need to have addressed.
Yeah.
I don't believe it necessarily blew us up.
Okay.
Now we can say that. What we'll say is, well, you know, they're doing gay weddings now. I can't be a part of that.
Yeah.
Okay, that may be the case for some people, but the fact is, you got the GMC now who says, well, we ain't doing no gay weddings, and we're not going to have gay pastors, but we're gonna do this thing the Methodist way.
Yeah.
And what I say to that is, well, we said that we weren't going to do those things under the Book of Discipline as well, but there were cultural changes and changes of heart among clergy and leaders that made that impossible. I believe that the GMC will face the same thing at some point.
And just a quick definition of the GMC.
They are a new denomination that about 2021 got started.
Global Methodist
Church.
Right, okay.
And it is a more orthodox view they hold of Scripture. They still have a teneracy. It's just a little bit different. Churches have more of a say about who their pastor is going to be than they used to. But when I was a district superintendent, that was true for all of my churches, because if I had a church that was just absolutely against the pastor, I wasn't going to force that pastor in, because it would have been bad for him or her and for the church.
Yeah.
So I was operating that way when I was a leader anyway. And then they also have said that they will pay lower apportionments than in the United Methodist Church. I think that is temporary too, because as the church grows, they will continue to add more bishops and what they call now presiding elders instead of district superintendents. Those people have to be paid.
Yeah.
So and some of the presiding elders right now are working for very little pay, and they're having to not only be a presiding elder, but they're serving a church at the same time. So I just have concerns about it. I do believe the Global Methodist Church is a move of the Holy Spirit. I do believe that. I think that we've seen them have enough success that we can point to it and say, okay, their heart's right. They're trying to really do this thing biblically. But I think sometimes we're a bit unrealistic about how that's going to be difficult living in the 21st century. And so that's why I've chosen to be independent. Okay. And there are many of my friends And a lot of the largest United Methodist churches right now have remained independent for many of the reasons that I'm saying to you right now.
So in your leadership of Grace Resurrection, which is an independent church, and I don't see going anywhere on that one,
Neither.
what are some of your thoughts about staying independent? What are the pros and what are the cons to that for us as we grow so rapidly
Yes.
every week?
We do. And to the point that you and I were talking about this morning, I'm concerned about, it's wonderful to have a packed church, but when you can't help
Fit
people
everybody
find
in.
seats, I get a little worried about that. So
A lot of folding
It's a
chairs.
good problem, but it is a problem, and we're trying to address that problem right now. But I think,
What's your leadership stance on it? Like, what do you think about it every day?
let me start with the cons. So some of the cons would be that there are times in the life of a church when there is a severely questionable issue that comes up in the life of a pastor that sometimes laity will not be comfortable addressing. That's probably the best way I know to say it. And it's a lot easier sometimes for a congregation to allow a district superintendent, a presiding elder, to come in as a district or an overseer, so to speak, and a bishop who is an overseer to help them through that process. I get it. I did that the whole time I was on the cabinet. And it is helpful, especially to smaller churches. Most of the time, medium to larger churches can handle it themselves. But smaller churches, a lot of times, could not, and they needed that help. So the cons of being independent is it's all you and your board. However, I do believe in most churches that I have served, there were folks who were fully capable of handling any issue that would arise. The second piece is, the con is, in the United Methodist Church and the Global Methodist Church, the congregation can say, we don't want him anymore. We don't want her anymore. We want another pastor. And in the old system, you could say, well, that's fine. If the bishop believes you need a new pastor, you'll get one. If the bishop doesn't believe that, then your pastor will continue. So now in the independent system, the church can say, we don't want him anymore. We don't want her anymore. And they can have a meeting in the conference room and decide we're not going to have that person anymore. And they don't have to ask anyone. So it's a little less secure for pastors. And associate pastors who are or ordained clergy, I should say. So the pros, though, would be that there's a level of trust that has to be built within a church to make those kinds of decisions on their own. And I believe that can be done. It won't be perfect, but nothing's perfect in this world. We're all people, we're just trying to make the best decisions we know to make with what we have, the information that we have. I believe churches are fully capable of making those kinds of decisions. Another pro would be that instead of, in my lifetime as a pastor, Julia, I have pastored churches that paid in apportionments anywhere from $10,000 a year all the way to $600,000 and $700,000 a year. And I remember when we would send those checks, I was happy about the good things that were happening with that money. But as I watched those dollars go out of the local church, I thought, wow, I could do some good ministry with that money if it were here. So that's a pro for me too, that, we have this. I don't know if you watched it, we just got a wonderful video from India with the mission that we're working with there, and they're thanking us, for what we did. And we're also doing some great work already here locally in the community with mission organizations. So we can use the dollars that we would have been sending up top to be spread around. We can use those dollars right now to affect the ministries that are going on right in our community and those that we feel are really important to support globally. And to me, that's a great pro.
Yeah,
it's a big pro. And I think the last pro I would say is that it gives a pastor an opportunity to really become a part of the community and not be just kind of this temporary person who, they might be gone. Every June, we're going to have to wonder if they're going to be gone or not. Because I saw a lot of churches, just as their pastors were really starting their ministries, the cabinet said, wow, that person has a lot of skill. We need them over here.
Yeah.
And they'd be pulled out of that church and put into another church, especially if the pastor was doing well. Pastors were moved because they were having problems a lot of times, but an even greater number of pastors sometimes were moved because they were doing really great.
Wow. Yeah.
And we need them over here, which I totally understand. I got. But now, as an independent church, you don't have to worry about that every June. And it gives me an opportunity to get to know and become a part of the lives long-term of the people that I serve. Mm-hmm. And there will be issues between me and the people at times. That's leadership. But there are healthy ways to work through that. Mm-hmm. And I think that we're laying some groundwork for that here. Mm-hmm. So anyway, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit because I do sometimes really miss the camaraderie that I had at times with folks in that system. But I still have my true friendships that I had in that system. There were folks that I thought were my friends that they probably weren't. They may even feel the same about me in some ways. I hope not. But the friends that I had who were truly my friends who loved me and cared about me on both sides of the theological spectrum, I'm still friends with. But in an independent church, you don't get that interaction as much unless you pursue it, which I'm trying to do.
Right, yeah. Well, what I've found is that it's such an exciting time at Grace because there are new developments every week. There are new people every week. There are new opportunities for us every week. So I'm sure that
it's beautiful.
That makes it a beautiful time for you to be in the midst of all this. The other thing you said to me this morning before we started the podcast when we were just chatting, and I think I'll close with this, is you said, we are in the middle of history. So as we close out, because our tech is telling us we have 5 seconds left or 5 minutes, can you talk a little bit about Grace Resurrection being in the middle of history right now?
Yes. We have an opportunity, Julia. I think we have an opportunity that no other pastor in history has had right now, as far as the Wesleyan way.
Okay.
And that's where we are right now. I tell them in 100 years they're going to be talking about us.
Yeah.
And this is an exciting time. It's been a difficult time. It's been a dark time in some ways. But I believe I see God moving us towards some things that are miraculous, and I'm just thankful to be a part of it. So we are making history, and I take that very seriously with what I'm saying right now and the decisions that I'm making. And I think it's a tremendous blessing that God's trusting us with this.
Yeah.
It always, and I know we're getting short on time, but I want to say this: I'm always amazed that God trusts James Williams with the business of the church. I'm amazed that God trusts us, human beings, with the business of the church, but He does, and we should not take that for granted. It's a big responsibility.
Well, we are really excited to be making history with you.
Yeah, me too.
So thank you for your time today.
Yeah.
I appreciated us delving a little deeper into some topics. So
I want to thank Mitchell as well. You don't see his face, but we absolutely could not do this without Mitchell. So he's given us all kinds of signals behind the scenes, and it helps us.
Yeah, it's a group effort over here in more ways than one.
Yeah.
Thanks again, James.
All right. God bless.
You.